Welcome to In Our Nature, Saint John, where city streets meet salt marshes. Saint John New Brunswick ecosystems tell a story of resilience. Join us as we explore how nature and people coexist. The Saint John Naturalists Club can be found under Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Nature Saint John. Come study, conserve, educate, and enjoy nature together with us on the east coast of Canada. Donations are accepted at the Canada Helps website. Well, today I'm here with Kendra Driscoll, and Kendra Driscoll is a curatorial assistant for the Botany and Mycology section of the Natural History Department at the New Brunswick Museum. And while she is primarily interested in lichens and associated fungi, she also likes to learn about other taxonomy groups whenever possible. And before we get started talking to Kendra, I just wanted to take a minute to share a story about when I met her. And as co-president and podcaster for the Saint John Naturalists Club, which operates as Nature Saint John on our social media sites, I went out for a field trip organized by the group last fall and was automatically smitten with these small life forms, as well as the information and knowledge that Kendra shared with our walking group at Rockwood Park. So while we were out on our walk, Kendra was holding a book called Common Lichens of Northeastern North America, and it was written by Troy McMullen and Francis Anderson, which I believe is from Nova Scotia. I told my husband I wanted it for a Christmas present. It is no longer in print, is my understanding, and you have to actually contact the author to get a copy. So it was a really special Christmas present, and I'm really happy to have it, and I can't wait to go out in the springtime and look at some lichens and try to figure out what they are. So that'll be exciting for me. Thank you for recommending the book, first of all. I really appreciate it. The hours of enjoyment. So just wondering for our listeners, what exactly is a lichen?
So mosses and lichens, you will find them in the same place. And some of the lichens even have common names that imply that they are mosses. You've got your reindeer moss, but it's not a moss at all. Mosses are tiny little plants that have no vascular tissue and require a lot of water for their biology. Lichens aren't plants at all. There's kind of the classic symbiotic organism. So if you were to look up in the dictionary, symbiosis, two things living together in close association to make something new, lichens are usually the example you'll find in your little encyclopedia entry, if we still had encyclopedias.
Now we have Google.
We have Google, exactly, and Wikipedia, so it works out the same way. Lichens are composed of two different forms of life entirely brought together. So you have, on the one hand, the fungus that forms the bulk of it. So you also can call them lichenized or lichen-forming fungi. And you have either an algae or a cyanobacteria, or sometimes both. That's usually inside a fungal envelope. So those two things come together and gives the fungus sort of the opportunity to live as a photosynthetic organism. Fungi don't normally do that. They don't have the ability to get their food from the sun, but their photosynthetic microbe inside does. And the two live together either in a farming relationship or in a happy marriage, depends on the situation and depends who you ask. Some of these questions are open for debate. But essentially, the fungus creates a nice cozy home, and the algae provides the food, kind of stays at home and makes dinner.
That's interesting, because even in your introduction, I thought, lichens and mycology,
So taxonomically, I can use words like taxonomically.
Sure.
The name of each lichen, the scientific name, follows that fungus. So you can think of it, instead of saying it's a symbiotic organism, this mysterious thing of two pieces brought together, another way to think about it is that a lichen is a fungus that has learned how to live like a moss, like a plant.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. And what pulled you personally into studying lichens? Was there a moment that hooked you?
I don't think that there was a single moment, but before I was always interested in botany and mycology and the natural world in general. And I have a liking for things that are small and kind of overlooked and maybe underloved. I tend to I gravitate toward those things, and I like things that are tiny. So before I got into lichens, my first field job was working with bryophytes, mosses and liverworts. I was just a field assistant for a graduate student at the university, and we would go out and set up these plots and see what mosses could we find and try to figure out what they were and take tiny little samples. I did that for 3 summers, and I saw this job post in my final year for a lichens and air quality study. And we had one lichenologist had come and joined our team on the bryophyte team one year, and he said that with lichens, there were spot tests that you could like put chemicals on things and they would change color, and that made lichens more fun. And I think that comment kind of stuck with me. So I was kind of looking for an opportunity. And I went and did a summer working with Stephen Clayton on a lichens and air quality study at the New Brunswick Museum. And I just never looked back. I went back to the museum for an internship after I graduated the following year and just kind of stayed and did contract after contract until they gave me a real job eventually. So
there's a lot of questions I could ask you. Like, is our air quality good?
Well, it's much improved from what it was. And you can see it in the lichens, actually. Is
there a reason for that, or we don't know?
Well, there are lots of reasons. I mean, there's tighter regulation on things. So one of the problems for lichens is if you have a lot of sulfur dioxide pollution, you wind up with a couple of things happening. Sulfur dioxide interferes with algae directly, so that kind of causes a problem for lichens that rely on algae. It destroys their chlorophyll. And so a lichen doesn't function. It's toxic to the symbiosis, and the whole thing kind of breaks down.
Right.
So that's one problem. The other problem is the same pollutant, sulfur dioxide, can acidify the bark. You've heard of acid precipitation. Well, here we have acid rain, but also acid fog. And so, especially around the coast, where we are, it causes a lot of problems, acidification of the bark on the tree. So between those two things, and then with nitrous oxide as well, it can really cause a problem for lichens. Yeah.
So the more lichens we have, the better our air quality.
Yeah, in broad terms. And there are some that are pollution tolerant. But back in the 1920s, this concept of a lichen desert was put forward, and in really big urban centers, and especially in industrial centers. Early scientists noticed, following the Industrial Revolution, a fall off of lichens. So instead of having lichens on urban trees, they'd become bare. The lichens would die off. And it's really a stark difference between the inside of a city and the outlying areas where the air quality was better. So before we had good monitoring by chemical means, we didn't have pollution monitoring stations, people could kind of map out where was the air quality better by where are the lichens and where is the diversity really tanked.
That's very interesting. I'm going to take more notice when I don't see them.
Yeah.
And what's around me. Is it a big industry, or am I in a different place, right?
Yeah. And I mean, obviously we need good air too. And so it's not like regulations were brought in to save the lichens in urban centers, but
they're
air
a tell.
pollution.
They're a tell.
Yeah. And the big thing that's changed is that we have new technologies and new regulations over the last 100 years that have changed things.
What roles do lichen play in an ecosystem that most of us never even notice?
So, I mean, lichens are kind of underloved, I would say. Not by me, but in general. Another group that's underloved are little invertebrates. So, springtails, tiny land snails, insects in general. It's not the big charismatic thing that people notice. It's not the poster child for conservation. It's not a panda. People aren't like, oh my God, save the pandas.
Right.
And a lot of those organisms take shelter in lichens. They feed on them or they live in them and kind of make a little home in there. And if you picture, I tend to work on lichens on trees in particular, is kind of my main focus. If you look at the bark of a tree, there's a lot more area for shelter and a lot more food, and a lot more complexity if it's a tree that's covered in lichens versus just a tree with smooth, bare bark and nothing going on. So that's one thing that lichens do, is kind of have a role there.
A healthier tree maybe, like especially for wildlife?
A healthier ecosystem. I mean, the tree, I think it's a net nothing to the tree, whether it's covered in lichens or not.
Okay.
It's really just, the lichens aren't taking any nutrient from the tree. They're They're not like shelf fungi that are literally eating the wood. They're not. That's the thing that's different about lichens versus other fungi, is that they are getting their carbon source from photosynthesis through their photobiome, from light.
Yeah.
And sunlight interacts with the algae, and that's where they get their carbon and their food source. So they're not hurting your trees.
Right.
Incidentally, people ask about that all the time. Oh no, my tree's covered in lichen. Your tree is fine.
Okay.
But the tree probably doesn't care if it doesn't have any lichens. I don't know that it makes any difference to a tree. But it makes a difference to the organisms that are living on that tree or on the ground, where lichens can form shelter for them and provide food, because you'll see little mites and insects and slugs grazing on lichens, and they even have their favorite parts. Sometimes I have a video of a tiny little mite just eating the fruiting body where the spores that are packed with energy on a lichen are, and ignoring the whole rest of the lichen. They just are focused in on that one piece.
Okay, I know the answer to this question because I went on the field trip with you, but I would really like you to answer it. For our listeners, lichens are so small. So how do you see these little spores, and how do you see like the detailed parts of it? Because when you look at it with the bare eye, it's difficult.
So there are levels to that.
Okay.
The first line of defense, I'd say, or not of defense, of investigation. The first line of investigation would be your eyes, of course. So you see a slightly different color or a blotch. Some of them are very visible, naked eye. But to get at the details, you really want a nice hand lens, something around 10 times magnification. It doesn't have to be fancy, even backwards binoculars for people who are maybe into birds.
They have those?
Well, no, if you take your binoculars and you turn them around.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
And I've been birding for a while now.
Well, now you can use your binoculars to get a closer look at, like, they're not designed for that, but it'll work in a pinch.
That's interesting. Okay.
If you just need to get a closer look. But then to look at the actual spores, the spores are that much smaller. Mostly they're microscopic. And so that's where taking a sample back, if you are making a serious study of lichens, because you don't want to disturb them for no reason.
Or if you have the book that I just bought for a Christmas present.
Now this book, I don't know if it even has details of spore measurements in it. I'd have to look. But you can see a lot with a hand lens. That for a lot of lichens, that's enough to get you where you need. This book is really meant for use with a hand lens.
Okay.
But if you're if you're like me and you're collecting lichens for posterity, for science, for a really serious biodiversity study and depositing them in a museum, then you have the opportunity to also look with a microscope. So that's where you bust out a razor blade, get a little thin section, put it on a slide, and that's it. You have to go to quite a high level of magnification sometimes to see all the details you need to see. It depends on the species.
Oh, that's really...
Yeah.
Why are lichens so sensitive to air pollution, and how do scientists use them to monitor environmental change? Yeah,
one of the things that makes them generally sensitive is that, they're there over the long term, actually. Because they're slow growing, they have this opportunity to kind of breathe in, for lack of a better word, to absorb whatever is in the air. So this is particularly true for things that are growing on trees, for the epiphytic lichens. And that study I mentioned that I got my start with, looking at lichens and air quality in Saint John, that's what we were looking at specifically, was lichens on the trees. They're breathing in all of this. Not breathing, they're absorbing whatever's in the air. And they're absorbing it specifically when it's humid out as well. That's when they're metabolically active. And it leaves them vulnerable if there are toxic things floating around. So it's the chlorophyll that especially will degrade more quickly. But not all lichens are equally sensitive to pollution. There's a role for nitrogen pollution as well, and phosphorus that's maybe not as well documented as sulfur dioxide, but it certainly plays a role in direct toxicity. One group that's especially sensitive are cyanolichens. I know that they require a lot of humidity, so maybe that interplay of humidity and pollution really knocks them down, but they are certainly more sensitive to disturbance generally than other lichens are. So the cyanolichens are the ones that have cyanobacterium instead of an algae inside of them, and they require a lot of water for photosynthesis. They require water for reproduction, and they really like a really nice forest that's been untouched and is
so you probably find them more in rural areas than maybe in city centers.
You do, for sure. And I mean, even within that, there's not all lichens are created equal in terms of their sensitivity. And there are lots of species that thrive in an urban environment as long as it's not so polluted that nothing can grow. There are things that will tend to travel around cities. And there's even one species that we do have here that it must have evolved around a volcanic vent or something like that, because it not only will tolerate really high levels of sulfur pollution, but it seems to require them. It won't occur. It'll actually disappear from areas where it previously got established once pollution levels drop to a certain point where it doesn't have that much sulfur. So if you were to abandon cities and industry and just stop polluting the air whatsoever, these lichens would kind of die out. One weird species.
So that's really interesting, but it brings to mind like the life cycle of a lichen. When you say that this one might have come from a volcanic eruption, but that might have been thousands, if not millions of years ago. So they would have repopulated, right? But they're also slow growing. So I guess I'm asking, what is the life cycle of a lichen?
Oh, okay. It's not that this lichen arrived in Saint John as part of a volcanic eruption.
Okay.
The thought is that it must have evolved somewhere where there is naturally a lot of sulfur. So that would be, in volcanically active areas. The lichen I'm thinking of, some people call it sulfur eater, and that's my favorite. That's my favorite name for it, so that's what we're going to go with.
Okay.
Officially, scientifically, Lechinora conitzioides. Doesn't look like much. It actually was introduced in North America. It's definitely not from here. It was one of the few things that we can say unequivocally it was introduced, and it's only in certain urban centers, and you can kind of see where it spread. I don't remember where it first arrived in North America, but it would have come over from Europe, possibly during settlement, but maybe not until after we started probably not until we started polluting the air, actually. And it would have spread from wherever it was that it evolved. But it is in Saint John, and you can kind of tell where the worst traditional areas of sulfur pollution are by where it's thriving.
I see.
Yeah. So the way that lichens function is that they are dormant much of their lives. They have this funny superpower. It's kind of the key to their success. If you picture growing on an exposed rock or even up on a tree, there are going to be times of the day when you're completely dried out. And the way that a lichen functions is it's only metabolically active it's only effectively living when there is enough moisture. And that can happen on a seasonal cycle. For most things, it also happens on a daily cycle. So once or twice a day, or depending on the weather in the local area, conditions are right that they will soak up that water from the air or from precipitation, and they kind of start living again after spending all night or all day dormant. They've got these twilight hours where they're doing their thing, and that's when they do their growing. That's part of why they're so slow living, but it's also so growing rather. They're slow living. They're only living part-time. Like the rest of the time they're effectively hibernating. But that's why they can survive in what is effectively a pretty extreme environment. If you're growing out exposed like that and you don't have roots that are in the soil that are helping you maintain your moisture all day, then going dormant is how you kind of survive times of drought, rather than trying to live through that, trying to maintain photosynthesis when the conditions aren't right. And that's when a lichen would become really stressed.
So do they sort of grow dormant during winter? Does the cold affect them?
Every species would have its own degree of tolerance for all conditions, kind of the same as any other form of life. So some will tolerate lots of cold, some will tolerate lots of heat, and then a lot are in between. But it's not so much that they would go dormant in the winter, is that they would take advantage of any opportunity when the conditions are quite right. So if you have a mildish, damp day in the winter, They probably are doing their thing. We have some anecdotal evidence that some of the lichens we have here are producing mature spores to make the next generation of lichen in the wintertime. I'm not sure why or what the advantage of that is. Maybe you'd ask an evolutionary ecologist for those answers to really think about it. Yeah. But they're active in the winter, I think. It's hard to study these things, but... And there would be times in the summer when they're also hibernating, so it's on more of a daily cycle.
What are the surprising ways that human beings have used lichens, like whether historically or in modern science?
One of my favorite uses, you can see some of the reindeer lichens, they call them, or caribou lichens, named because they literally are food for caribou. It's the main forage source for caribou in places that have that. They look like tiny little trees, and so sometimes you'll see them like spray painted green, like bright green, and then placed dry in a diorama or something that as like little craft trees. So that's, I don't know if it's surprising, but it's inventive. And it works well because they dry out so easily. You know? Lichens can be used as natural dyes. So Harris Tweed, very famously, has used lichens as to produce one of the colors that they have. I'm not sure if they still do that because it's not, if you're ramping up production, it's not necessarily sustainable to use really slow-growing natural sources to make your dyes. But I think of that anytime I see someone wearing tweed. The scholars are dressed by lichens.
What color does it make? Is it?
I think it's an orange.
Orange color? Yeah, okay. So if I see orange and tweed, I'll have to question.
There are some traditional medicinal uses for lichens. Really emergency food if needed. There are some that you could kind of eke some nutrition out of if you have to. I think the rock tripes. I remember learning as a kid that was an emergency survival food. These at the time I didn't know they were lichens.
Did you taste them?
No.
I was going to say, do they taste like chicken?
No.
Okay.
No. I mean, I wouldn't recommend eating lichens under normal circumstance. They have a lot of funky chemistry to them, actually. And there is at least one lichen that is quite toxic, and they call it the wolf lichen sometimes. I'm not 100% sure if it was actually used by people to poison wolves, but that is kind of, that's the thought, is that they're called wolf lichens because you could use it to poison wolves. But how you get the wolves to eat them, I'm not sure. So I don't know if that's entirely accurate. It's a bright yellow lichen. Really pretty. We don't get it here, but we have other things with the same chemistry.
Okay. For people who are more curious after this episode, how can beginners start studying lichens outdoors, or any tools or tips?
The first thing I would do is get a hand lens to get a nice close look at those gray splotches that you're seeing on trees, on rocks. There are some websites that you could go to. The British Lichen Society has a lot of really good introductory material for lichens, so that's a good place to look. Ways of Enlightenment has some good stuff. And really, if you just Google lichen identification, you probably find something that has some tips. The other thing I would suggest, if people really want to know what's in their local area, get a book. Probably not the Common Lichens of Northeastern North America, because it is hard to come by. There's a book on Ontario lichens that's actually very relevant to our area. Okay. So it's newer and so a lot easier to get a hold of. Okay. So that would be maybe a good one to start with. And iNaturalist can be your friend if you like photography, because that's a place where you can get a picture of something and put it up, and there may be someone around who knows it a little better than you do and can help guide you. That's a great place to get started, I think, for learning. Okay. And it is fun. Yeah. You know, I use it for insects and stuff too.
Well, that's cool. That's very cool. So can you tell us more about your work at the museum? Like, what are you currently working on?
Oh my goodness. Well, we always have a lot going on. So one thing that we do is a lot of general biodiversity surveys. So I don't know if you know this, but in most natural history museums, including ours, the staff actually go out and adds to the collection. I think people think museum, they think there's just like a bunch of dusty stuff on a shelf. And in fact, we go out and we actually pick stuff up from the woods, bring it back, dry it out, and make it into a nice specimen with archival labels and like fancy paper to house it and all of that. Or formalin, depending what the case is. I don't work with formalin because it's not necessary for plant preservation. But my particular area of expertise lately has been a deeper rabbit hole. Something happens when you start looking at lichens, you can't unsee them. Once someone points them out, you start seeing them everywhere.
Like the ones that you spotted on my stairs.
Like the ones
by my
that,
house.
exactly.
Now I'm always going to see them.
Now you're always going to see them. You're going to, it's not going to be background noise anymore. You're going to see, oh, that's a lichen. That's, you know. When you start looking at lichens, you start seeing the larger ones. And then you start noticing that there are really smaller ones. And then when you get into microscopes, you see there are really small ones that you didn't see in the field. And then if you're me, you start seeing that sometimes there are additional fungi growing on the lichen. Lichenicolous fungi is what they call them, literally like from lichen, obviously, and cola, which means to dwell on. Most of them are parasites, not necessarily heavy parasites. Some of them cause almost no symptoms, but they grow only on lichens. And they have been really understudied, if you can imagine. Not a lot of work on Atlantic Canadian lichenicolous fungi. Probably.
That's surprising, Kendra.
So I've been working with Stephen Clayton and others on trying to get together a list for these and kind of adding to our herbarium holdings for these specimens, because we didn't even have any reference collections for most of them.
Do you get to name them when you find them?
When we find a brand new species, yes, I do.
Oh,
so
awesome.
I've got a paper in review right now, actually, with some other people where we're describing a species that was actually found in a herbarium for the first time. It's on one of the smaller lichens, crust-forming lichens, and it's this teeny tiny little black spot on them, and no one has described it. We now know that it's in pretty much the eastern half of North America, and it might be more widespread than that. But most of the collections were not picked up out in the woods as a specimen of lichenicolous fungus. Most of them were picked up from herbarium specimens that were already filed. So it's kind of a superpower of herbaria. And then my big project is I am going to try and do a checklist, again, with a lot of other people contributing data, but for all of Atlantic Canada. And that's going to form, if my proposal passes, the main part of my master's thesis, because I've just gone back to school part-time through the museum. And I'll be studying at the University of New Brunswick. So hopefully in the next couple of years, we'll have a fairly comprehensive list of what we know so far, which is probably about 250 species in our region.
It'd be kind of fun. Like, I know we have apps like Merlin for birds or eBirds, or, you know, to have one for lichen to see, oh, that's a life for a lichen. I haven't seen that one before.
Oh, that's fun.
Once you do your list.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really... Some of them are so small. You're talking about things that are a fraction of a millimeter. You know? Right.
Yeah. It would be hard. But just one last question. Sure. I was recently away in Central America. Are any lichens that sort of have the resilience to live anywhere and they're all over the planet?
Just about. We have some things here that would also be in South America. We definitely have overlap with like Madeira and the Canary Islands. So it depends on the lichen. Some of them are primarily Arctic, and then you get a few little like on mountaintops down here. Yeah. Some are almost everywhere. Some of those urban lichens in particular. Yeah. And some of our things that are fairly sensitive also grow in what you would call cloud forests in South and Central America. And what they're really responding to is that high humidity, I think. Yes. It's hard you can't put lichens in a lab very easily and study what they're going to do because they're so slow growing. So, it's difficult that way. But they, there would be overlaps. It's entirely possible that you saw the same species that we have in New Brunswick, but it's like a Venn diagram when you go around the world where there are overlapping ranges. Yeah, because
sometimes you look at something and go, oh, that's just a lichen. Like, it's almost like there's a commonality to it. Like, oh, I've seen that before. And other times you look and you go, oh, that one looks really different. And, it's just kind of going from a novice, like I'm certainly not into them, never really looked at them under a microscope, but sometimes there's a familiarity. And I just
Absolutely. At the very least, you can find things that are very similar, that are in the same family, but you could have seen the same species. It depends on what factor they're responding to. What's the limiting factor for the growth of that lichen, right?
Right.
So if it's something that loves sulfur, like the sulfur eater, then you find it in places with a lot of sulfur dioxide, naturally occurring or man-made.
Right.
If it's something that loves humidity, and that's the limiting factor for its biology, is it needs constant high humidity, you'll find it maybe like in cloud forests and in temperate rain forests, or what you'd call perhumid situations.
Right.
But like in the fog belt, maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Fog City, yes.
Right. So it just depends. And for some things, we don't know what's driving the patterns that we see. So it's a fun challenge to try to sort that out, and a less fun challenge to sort it out when something's at risk. An important challenge, but kind of hard to pin things down and know how we can help.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I said that was the last question, so I'm going to thank you for joining us today. That was really fascinating, and I look forward to getting response from our listeners.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by to listen to In Our Nature Saint John today. Remember, we can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Nature Saint John. Donations are accepted through the Canada Helps website. We host events every month, and they can be found listed on our website at stjohnnaturalistclub.org/events. Please follow and subscribe to our monthly podcast, and if you have any ideas for discussion, let us know in the comments. Until next time.